because the cloud scares me. I mean, there's no other reason.
I do too. I recommend to your computer.
Okay, then I'll do it to my computer and I'll send it along as a file as soon as we're done. So again, we're at 11:04, and I want to welcome everyone to this call and thank you for your time and for weighing in. We are starting the workshopping of the chapters, which will help us see. We'll give people an opportunity to think about the next 10 years and what each of these chapters has to, what we should put in to reflect the moment that we're meeting now, but 10 years out from now as well. And it's also a chance to integrate chapters because you'll hear about what's in every chapter. And I provided a very short template, which we're going to try to use just to focus the discussion. But we hope that most of the discussion will take place from people on the call. And I'm going to be the note taker for Lorene, and we're also recording. So let me turn it over to you then. And this chapter is on the challenges. I sent it out last night if you want to review your copy at home. So with that, thank you so much for kicking us off, and we will turn it over to you.
Sounds good. All right, I'm just going to share my screen and bring the template up. Like I said, the template was great just to help us kind of help to summarize all the thoughts and all the things that we need to talk about today. So we started out with the template with just giving an overview of the current chapter content. So basically there's an intro that introduces the fact that the chapter is going to be vignette based, and the examples that are given are all from the PRCs, the CTSA, and other community engaged research projects. So the examples came from sort of more dedicated funding streams. There were 5 challenges that were presented, and it was organized with an example, and then it talked about challenge, action steps, and take-home messages, and then had some references associated with it. So the 5 challenges that were discussed were engaging and maintaining community involvement. And then there were some subgroups underneath. How do you engage a community in a randomized clinical trial? How do you overcome historical exploitation? How do you maintain community engagement throughout research? How do you engage a community organization as a partner in exploratory health research? So for each of those sub-bullets, there was that outline of the challenge, let me go back a minute, the challenge, the action steps, and the take-home messages. So the second challenge was overcoming differences between and among academics and community. So thinking about engaging community where there are cultural and racial differences. How do you work with a community when there's educational and socio-demographic differences? And how do you engage when there's cultural, educational, socioeconomic differences within the community, as well as the community partners? Working with non-traditional communities was the third challenge, specifically focusing on engagement when there's geography distance, and how do you engage a state as a community? The fourth challenge was initiating a project with a community and developing a community advisory board. So the 3 subtopics were: how do you start? How do you set up and maintain? And then how do you launch a study with a brand new partnership that brings in more diverse partners? And then the last challenge was overcoming competing priorities and institutional differences. So the subgroups were: how do you work with the community when you have these competing priorities? How do you overcome differences in financial practices? And how do you harness the power and knowledge of multiple partners? So what we're proposing, this was the result of lots of conversation with our community, the Collaboration and Engagement Enterprise Committee. So basically what we were talking about and some of the changes that we're proposing is thinking about an intro that would have a little bit more of an overview of challenges and focus on lessons learned, because we know that we've come a long way since the second revision, which was 10 years ago. And this is where we can discuss our new layer of barriers, which we discussed on our last call, including race, social justice movements, to make sure that that's integrated throughout the chapter. We could also focus on 5 challenges and focus on the challenges, but also solutions. So, focusing on how some groups have overcome some of these challenges. But also making sure that we represent the community perspective. The majority of the examples given, even though they were examples of partnerships, were from the lens of the community, of the research partner. And we thought it might be interesting and really important to have the view of the community partner. So to have their perspective on these, to let them tell their stories, and to be aware, of those community concerns in participating into research. And knowing that depending on the community, these can really differ depending on history and culture. So adding examples from the community perspective. We thought about talking about fiscal readiness. This goes back to Pastor Gilliard's talk. If any of you were on the spring meeting for the Collaboration and Engagement Enterprise Committee last week, the week before, the 15th. Where he really talked about what, from his lens, from a community partner's lens, what's really important for a community partner to say, am I ready for this or not, to be able to partner with a research team. So one of his issues or his points was fiscal readiness and not needing to be dependent on the research team, like the research funds that are coming in. So one of the challenges there is that it could exclude grassroots partners because many of them don't have budgets to rely on for things. And certainly to include examples outside of existing well-funded programs. We know that one of the challenges we face is maintaining funding, so that we want to show examples of groups that don't have a lot of funding or maybe have lost funding or had dips in funding, and how they continued and how they maintained, because that's a really important theme that challenges certainly our academic community partnerships. So our 5 challenges are similar, but a little bit different. So we also wanted to focus on initiating engagement, definitely overcoming historical exploitation. I think that's a really important thing. Putting agendas and egos aside. So really thinking about how we work together and balance that power. Building partnerships without funding. How do you engage a community organization as a partner? Integrating new partnerships, finding partners. I think that's one of the challenges that I certainly see in our institution when somebody wants to engage with a partner. And then thinking about that one time only or not community-based participatory research, but community engaged research. So it might be only one time, maybe it's a community advisory board, that all types of engagement is good. And so not focusing solely on partnered research. Maintaining community involvement, particularly when funding ends. Again, the geography component is really important, and then balancing priorities. So we wanted to keep those aspects. Overcoming differences between and among academics and community. So those things are still very relevant, that we definitely have some differences that we need to maintain, and we can just update those sections. We also thought it was really important to include barriers during COVID. This has really changed the face of what we've been doing and how we communicate with our partners, how our partners have been conducting business, things where they've had to, totally change priority on a dime. And so how do we do that when, in our example, it's COVID, but it can happen and be applicable to other situations as well. So thinking about the use of technology, shifting priorities, and then building partnerships quickly, because we've seen that partnerships have been bubbling up, that usually it takes a longer time, but now we're all in this together and seeing how we can leverage that momentum. And then lastly, thinking about institutional and policy barriers, thinking about trustworthiness and how do we build that within our institutions and not just within our research teams, overcoming differences in financial practices, and then having and addressing funding guidelines that are not community friendly, which we're seeing at local and at federal levels. So that's my very quick overview. And so my questions to you are these the 5 challenges we should focus on? Are there things that you feel should take more priority, or that we should shift around a little bit? And I'd really like your feedback on getting stories from our community partners and how we can build in these examples, and then thinking about how to obtain these examples. Since, we all have different partners, and, can this parallel the process that we're undertaking now to get examples from researchers? And if we can encourage our community partners to submit something as well. So I'll stop there. And
Great. I don't know if you can see the comments or the thing. So I think maybe I'll start, if it's okay, I'll go do Linda, Saeed, and then Lloyd. Because Linda has a very interesting, and then Minna, Linda, Saeed, Lloyd, Minna, and then anyone else after that, because Linda wants to talk a little bit about framing. So I think we should hear that. Linda, Saeed, I'll put it in the chat so I can keep up. I'll put it in the chat so you can watch. Okay, go ahead, Linda. Oh, I think you may be on mute.
I'm so sorry. After all this time, I have another button here from you. Okay, thank you so much for this really great overview, and thank you for taking out the word non-traditional communities. I was wondering if we could frame this instead of challenges, if we could discuss rather transformational changes or the complexity of change, and then how it was operationalized, because when we hear challenges, it's negative and we don't know who the challenge occurred with. Was it in the community level? Was it with the academic level? And it just sounds like, if we're all working together with principals, we should maybe think more in a positive framing. And then the other thing is, instead of barriers, could we find another way to think about the ways of succeeding, removals of certain infrastructures or differences? It's just a thought I had.
no, we agree. And I think making it that much more explicit, because that's why we wanted to make sure that we had solutions to any challenges, because we didn't want it to seem like, oh, you're going to hit this brick wall time and time again, and there's nothing you can do about it. We really wanted to focus on overcoming. So I like the idea of definitely making it that much more explicit.
That's great. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Saeed, yeah.
So a couple of points, I think one is connected to IRB issues. I do not know other book chapter has addressed it. The IRB issue has been an issue for the community partners for a long time, and we have moved on from having some challenges. Academic institutions started listening to the point that IRB is an issue, and sometimes they have a community IRB in the academic setting, or even the community has their community IRB. So that has been a underlying friction point for many different projects. So if it is not addressed in any other book chapters, I think it will be worth bringing it up, because this is real when you do the research. And other point I would make is connected to solutions, which I read through. One of the critical piece is changing the capacity of both academic and community partners to do CBPR or CNR. And that is a big issue. We expect that community partners are always in the same place as we are. Some of them are, some of them are not. And some of them are very small place, and they do not know how to even, as you mentioned, about the fiscal responsibility and how to do research. But same thing in the academic, not understanding the communities that well because of our own limitations.
Mhm.
So changing the capacity of the both community academic partner actually is extremely helpful. And we found out in our own projects in here, very quick example, a Hispanic center we have been working on for 20 years, had no people did research. Now they have a research unit. And it is far easier to work with them in terms of, I think, any of the research project, they're quite sophisticated, understand it, but it took a while. We don't take any credit for that, but we have been partnered with them in many different ways. And same way it helped Medical College to really understand how to work with the community partner. So some way I was trying to go through the list of suggestions. I think one of the critical issue is the community capacity or academic capacity for the SAMHSA to do CBPRC and are effectively, appropriately, and honestly.
Mhm.
So that is the 2 points.
Great, thank you. They're great points, and you're right, the IRB issues, and it might be a great place to highlight like the certification opportunity from the Chicago hub for community IRB as opposed to doing city training. So we do have some resources available to us to help move that forward.
Lorene, I'm wondering if you want to stop the share and
Yeah.
we can, you'll be able to see the chat, and I'll make a note of gathering stories too, and we want to get to that. And thank you. And the order for speaking is Lloyd, Sergio, Minna, Chaik, and I.
Okay, and can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
I'm on my backup. So this is testing my capacities. So first, I really agree with Linda and Saeed's comments and framing this about how we learn to work together, kind of normalizing these issues that we have to make progress, but as opposed to the problem solution, it may actually work better to frame it as learning together. My major comments, though, first is the labeling. This chapter, unlike every other chapter in the second edition, has the word research in the title. And I don't actually remember why, but because the entire principles is really talks about research in a broader sense about how we learn to improve health. So I'd actually like to suggest we keep that same broader framing for this chapter as well, inclusive of research, but not specific to research only, or research in the broadest sense of how we learn to work together to improve health for diverse communities. The other, which is somewhat more minor and yet in some ways not, is I think we need to look at how we work with people who have belief systems who are different than ours, including those who see science as a political action or who frame scientific arguments through the lens of the politics of the person speaking or their own, because that is sure an issue we're dealing with. There was an issue before with anti-vaxxers, and I think part of the principles need to be working with people who have different histories, but also who have different belief systems who may not accept those that we're trying to argue or bring forward. Those are mine.
I agree. I mean, now more than ever, the who do you trust conversation, do you trust the CDC? Do you trust government? It's so convoluted now how science and government are interwoven.
And how do you work with people who start off not trusting?
Yeah.
Sergio, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Liz, and thank you, Lorene, for providing that comprehensive overview. Very thoughtful, what you share with us. And I agree with Linda. I agree with Lloyd, and also with Saeed. I have 3 comments. One is that if we have learned something from my perspective during COVID, it's been the centrality of communities. I think that the institutions in general, we have failed tremendously to keep our community safe, and they have stepped up to advocate for themselves and to come up with solutions themselves. A very, very clear example is what's happening with vaccine distribution, and that community-based organizations and others have needed to step up in order to make things more equitable. Second thing that is related to that is all of us have heard about communities of practice. What is something that I'm very intrigued with is this concept of communities of solutions that the Institute for Healthcare Improvement is, is championing now. We are just in the middle of a 3-series training from them, from a trainer from the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, to talk exactly about communities of solutions. And it's remarkable. But what is remarkable is that the centrality, once again, of solutions, because something that the opportunity that we have here is not to see things so much from the academic perspective, which it is very strong in your presentation. It is the lens of academia, but how we can strike that balance and give priority, the lens from the communities, perhaps using the framework of communities of solutions. I'll be happy to share. I'm going to ask the trainer if I can share the slides with all of you, so you see a sense of. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, this is the institute, that Don Berwick, and those who came up with the triple M, the quadruple M now. So it is, and the last thing that I want to mention is the importance of community storytelling. Storytelling has become such an important, powerful tool that is coming from communities, and it is for up to us to go in and retrieve those stories that are coming up and that tend to be more powerful than the statistics that we can probably come up with. So just to keep in mind those three frames or frameworks, and we have a great opportunity to make progress, and consider what we have gone through in the last 10 years, especially the last 1 year plus.
Yeah,
Great, thank you.
thank you. Yeah, Minna, do you want to?
Yeah. And yes, thank you. This really was a thoughtful presentation. And I particularly like your point that, a lot of the vignettes last time were told from the researcher's point of view. I would suggest, as a corrective to that, rather than having some from the community point of view, I would rather that all of them be jointly honed vignettes that give the complete picture of what the team went through, the team including. And so that same as with the case studies, we would require that the authors of these vignettes be both. And on Lloyd's point, yeah, I think it's fine to make it not just about research, and I wouldn't say research in the broader sense, because I don't know that I would change that everything everybody does is research. Like, but I think if we do that, then I think it does flip a little. What is this chapter about? Because the whole book talks about challenges of community engagement all throughout, right? I guess. And it's not, we have a case studies chapter, right? So this is not that. So if it's not specifically about research, which is what it was in the last edition, those really were all research vignettes. What is it that makes this stand out? And I think we could argue that there is something, but it happens to be a chapter I'm particularly fond of, but I guess we'd want to think about what that is.
One of the things that I've been thinking about is and of course, listening to everyone's thoughts on it over the past meetings, is the overlap and how to balance that with some of the other chapters, because there is, I was looking back at the examples chapter, and so do I borrow some of the, everybody's going to be submitting their their stories, kind of borrow ones that fit into different chapters and kind of disperse them across. So yeah, and I guess as we're talking more, I'm seeing more and more overlap. And is this something that would summarize this, or is it an area that we should focus more in one particular area?
Oh,
Liz?
yeah, go ahead,
you guys hear
DJ.
me?
Yes, go
Can you
ahead.
hear me?
Yes,
Oh,
we-
great. I think I can clear this up a little bit about why this chapter was challenges in community engaged research. And Minna, you hit on it. We wanted to talk specifically and explain and talk about challenges and barriers and so forth, and about community engagement and the principles, and sticking with the principles. And chapter 1 sets the stage. Chapter 2 were the principles. Chapter 3 were the examples. And then I can't remember this chapter. I think maybe this is the challenges. Is this chapter 4 or 5? I think 5 was about engagement with. That's Michael's chapter.
This was
with-
5, I think, and Michael's was 4.
Yeah, okay. So we needed a chapter, because in the first chapter we started talking about research, and it was coming from the academic health lens. And we said we need to stop doing that. And then we said, okay, we need a chapter on community engaged research, specifically on it, because there are different challenges in that realm, if you will. So that's why this chapter kind of sort of stands alone, and it does overlap, because some of the challenges are the same, but different, different challenges. And that's why you have those specific headings about the history of why certain communities are hesitant to engage in research, and the approaches might be different in doing so. So that's the reason. So I like Lloyd's suggestion of community engaged research for health, and that might broaden it a little bit. But yes, Lauren, you're going to have some overlapping, but let the overlap happen, but know that other chapters will explain it a little bit more, but not in the research realm. And that's the reason why this chapter is such. And I'm sorry about the background noise. The other thing I wanted to ask about this chapter that we're talking about is there a conversation or discussion where a community entity, it could be a church community, it could be a community in general, such as a business or industry, trying to partner with an academic health center. So bidirectionality, I didn't hear that in the explanation, and I'm not too sure it was even in the chapter itself. So that might be something to consider.
So let me just clarify. So this chapter was very specific then to focus on research as opposed to a broader.
Correct.
Okay.
That's why this chapter is, the title of the chapter is Challenges in Community Engaged Research, right?
Right. That, yeah.
And
Okay.
and it focused on the academic, the CTSA specifically, in partnering with communities in research endeavors. And specifically, we should have probably, in hindsight, said for health. And it was kind of one directional in partnering with communities. And those challenges that you saw and you explained were coming from that lens, from the researcher's lens, and the examples as well. But I think it's time for the chapter to have a voice from the community as far as for health and research. But I think we need to keep the chapter, because it is a large part of what we do at academic health centers. It's big. Because you will have a lot of overlapping from the other chapters, then why have it?
But this conversation is incredibly helpful to understand kind of the history of the chapter and what the focus was intended. And even though, you know, you read it, just hearing that helps a lot in terms of the framing. So as we're, depending on whether we broaden it a little bit to include health, that I guess the evolution of it will make sense, makes a little more sense to me now, just hearing you talk about that. So thank you.
Yeah, we had to stop in our tracks when we were doing this book because a lot of the chapters were talking about community engaged research instead of community engagement. We had to really focus on community engagement as a whole because CENR, which is the research part of it, comes under that broad umbrella of community engagement.
Right.
I bumped Minna up to the front and then we'll all go after you, Minna.
Thanks. Mickey doesn't like that. Yeah, I think that, you know, whether it's focused on research or not, still doesn't mean that the point of view has to be the researchers. I was a co-author of 2 of the vignettes in that chapter, which were not from CTSA actually, and we wrote them together with the community partners, and they expressed, I mean, it wasn't your problem is your problem. If it was a problem, it was our problem, and the solution was our solution. And I think that should be the spirit of all of this, even if it's research focused.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to say it's our problem. It's a problem that we can work together on, and those were really good examples.
I also yield to Mickey first, and I'll go after you, Mickey. You go ahead.
Okay, I was just teasing. I want to share an experience that is repeating itself regularly in a variety of meetings where we're trying to resolve instead of bring issues out into the open. I'm not sure, Laureen, I don't mean this as a challenge to you and what you said. I'm not sure all the communities think we're in this together.
Oh, I agree.
I have a number of conversations with people out in the community where their view is you need a community partner now because you can't get funded without one.
Yep.
Not you have a particular interest in what's happening in my community. I'm wondering if we couldn't try to frame some kind of self-reflective issue where we recognize some of these problems. One of the things I put into the chat before was that we addressed some not adequately. There was 900 words about ethics in the first, in the second edition. It's now about a little over 1,000 words. We all have institutions where I think there's still a great deal of uncertainty about institutional willingness to take responsibility for what happens outside of the walls of the institution.
Absolutely.
We 10 years ago were concerned, quite honestly, that we were functioning in the community under a different set of rules in which even minimal risk research was looked at with a lot more scrutiny than clinical trials work when it was done in the academic health center. No particular guarantee of additional or confirmed oversight in what's happening in the institution, just a kind of bias on the part of people feeling, well, we don't have any control over the community. So I would hope that we could figure out how to frame a brief statement that points out that some of these issues don't have simple resolutions, and that by adopting a particular perspective, we may not be successful in genuinely engaging communities and in writing about it. I did have one more comment, but I think I will let it go for now. Thank you for letting me go, Liz.
No, that's okay. And I think I've learned my lesson because you made my point. But I'll say it again just for emphasis, but not too much of it. I think the book needs to contain a self-assessment tool for the university or organization about our reputation and activities in the past and in the present in the community, because I spend a great deal of my time apologizing for my institution, and some of the stuff I am unable to apologize for in meeting this moment. I'm actually presenting at Duke tomorrow. I think a few of you are, I don't know if you're at that meeting or not, on assessing what the institutional contribution is to increasing or decreasing trustworthiness. And I would make the argument that most of us in some institutions, so I have a public affiliation and I have a private affiliation. In my private affiliation, I would say we do not promote trustworthiness, and the public one does. So I think, we have to I think we need to talk about that, because a lot of times, or we are finding that institutions are like, how do we start from here and go forward? And the answer is you can't. You have to start from everything you have done and look backwards in order to go forward. To my first point, I wanted to talk about the storytelling. I think all of us have had the experience that clearly data and facts aren't what is compelling. So clearly it's the storytelling part. Because if data and facts were compelling, everyone would agree, but that's not the case. And the stories seem so much more powerful. So I wanted to weigh in with that as well. But yes, what I really want to say is everything Nikki said, he said so eloquently, was also in my mind, but not in such an eloquent way. So thank you, Nikki, for that. I'm presenting at the CTSA think tank. I'll put the information in the chat. If I can find it. So now let's see where we were. So I did put a few people on the list that, let's see, I have myself, I have Saeed, and then Jack, please do weigh in. This, as with engagement, always, we would love to hear your voice. We're all about that part. So Saeed, and then Jack, if you will, Liam, others, Chaik, I had you on the list, and so please weigh in with your thoughts.
No, not like you. My thoughts have been made already. I think Lloyd made them well. I think Lauren is a struggle of challenges versus opportunities, and also the areas where there's capabilities or capacity. I think those are sort of subtleties that will come out more clearly. And I do think that as we go forward, how do we frame this in an enabling way for the communities? And so, just the same conversation as vital conditions, which is growing on me, thanks to Lloyd and others for bringing that into my brain cells, but they're growing in my brain cells. So I think that's sort of the point I was trying to make. And yes, the challenges are there. That's the language people understand. We need to kind of flag it, maybe then bridge to opportunities and begin to frame it in that way, which I think is where we want this book to go, right? It's just more positive than sort of the traditional, more negative approach to it. And I do embrace the idea of community solution. We have a community of practice, and the concept of community as a solution is a good one. We may, Saeed, we may probably even introduce that in the scaling chapter, right? In terms of, we talked about sort of that construct a little bit. Some of it is about sort of scaling. How do you scale something like this? For what purpose? And when you do, what are some of the mechanisms? Because we can't use technology to scale community engagement as the only approach to do it. So I think it's nice. This is nice conversation. It's helping me think about what we are going to do with that chapter, right, Liz?
Yes, and I'm glad to hear that you're thinking about it, and everyone will work together with Michael in thinking about it. as we can. So thank you. Saeed, I'm sorry, go ahead. We went a little bit out of order. I appreciate your patience. Thank you. Oh, you may be on mute.
It's a few points. One is connected to the research aspect of this chapter. And this is how I believe some historical fact connected to that DJ may remember. In 2008, 9, 10, around that time, the CNR, the name started coming more in the literature, or actually this was maybe the earliest time the CNR came. CVPR was the language we used. And there is a difference. There is evolution and historical differences, but there is also evolution of CVPR to CNR. But research become a big aspect. So I think the chapter was intentionally placed, calling it a research, I'd say rightfully, because I think that become a factor. I don't want to go through the whole history in here, but there is something in the background that happened years ago that resulted in advent of the CNR language and more paper coming after that. Some people already know it in this group. Some people may or may not know that. Just want to point that out. That's critical. Second point, I would like to come back to the stories. I believe in stories, and I think stories really help me more than any other things I usually help. But I would also say stories from the perspective of both partners are helpful. Same is individual, academic and community partner. The reason is sometimes I found some of the project I'm seeing as a challenge, communities don't see it as a challenge. I can give you a brief example. One of the earliest RCT we're trying to do, randomized controlled trial, I thought that will be the problem because community will be against it, randomizing it. And that is the actual literature used to talk about. And surprising enough, that RCT was not the problem. I think they immediately got it, what they were trying to do. So my point is sometimes it could be really academic challenges and that has to overcome. Sometimes it's communities challenges that could be different. And sometimes it could be joint problem. Both sees the problem very similarly. Only third point I would make is we never talk about too much. Maybe it should be here or some other place. When you reviewers review this CBPR CNR project, even nationally or in the foundation, there is a significant lack of understanding. Maybe it is better now than 10 years ago, I would say, but there is a very difficulty. I have been in many committees from the CDC to NIH. People do not really get the CBPR CNR and the projects get affected by people's lack of understanding what it is, what these people are trying to do. People come out, you can just listen to the reviewers, you see that they're coming from a very different angle, not based in the CBPR literature or CNR. So that is a actually guideline, actually proposed guideline that was published in American Journal of Public Health, coming out of the work of the Council of Public Representative, Copper, for the reviewing community engaged research. Since then, I have not seen any more discussion on this, but I think people who write the grant, they think that people are looking at the grant, they know what they're looking at. Surprising enough, some of the good projects sometimes gets rejected because of our limitation in the reviewers. And I don't see we address that. So that is another point I just want to bring it up.
Great, thank you. Liam, you can go ahead. Oh, great, Liam. Hey there. Thank you.
Yep, sitting under the weight of the COVID books here. So Saeed, thank you very much for sort of that perspective. I realize I think I might be the only federal person sitting here, and well, I guess DJ too, right? In terms of the issue of the reviewer guidelines. And I think that's a good point. It's a challenge that has evolved over time and certainly has gotten a lot better in the last 10 years. And I was thinking would be a good part to put in here. The other issue that I think is really important that didn't come up, it would be good to address would be the notion of motivation. The motivation of the researcher and the motivation of the community to be partnering in these types of projects, because oftentimes they're not, they're each coming from it from a different way. The notion of co-creation of ideas. I was looking through this, just did a quick search on it. I think that co-creation, co-development is essential as we're talking about specifically community-based participatory research. And then the other thing, and it just flew out of my head. Oh yeah. So Saeed, you talked also about sort of the evolution of different terminology. And yes, you know, when I started getting into this sphere back in 2000, we talked about community-based participatory research as the, you know, the only thing. And then the realization that not everybody could do CBPR. And that was sort of the beauty of the framework that this group had come up with, was that nice spectrum of it, right? You know, and really being able to take a little bit of that pressure off and saying that CBPR sort of was the quote unquote gold standard. Mickey, I'm sorry if this is, but I think that we're seeing also the evolution to, you know, of citizen science, of community-led research. And you know, I think it was Minna who or somebody had said, well, where's a case study, or can we find something where it's the community that's actually led and partnered with the academics. So I think, you know, those would sort of be my, you know, key points: co-creation, motivation, and then really looking at the community-led elements.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I note the time. We have about just a little under 10 more minutes. I wanted to give Jack and others who hadn't spoken an opportunity, and then I had also had the same thought, Mickey, you did, as we are for this call, hot synced, to put Lorene, you back on the end, just to make sure that you didn't have any unanswered questions. And obviously this is an ongoing discussion, and also we can continue. So one of them was, how do you get the case studies that you want? So I have Jack, if you wanted to weigh in, Zeno, if you wanted to weigh in, and then we can cycle back to Lorene.
I will take the opportunity and just go quickly. I hope folks will take a look at the community of solution work that's now 50 plus years old, from the 1967 Folsom report. It really talks about the local problem shed and the local, Mickey's got the book, man. I bought 20 copies of this. It's been reprinted now by Harvard University Press. But it really then moves quickly to the asset shed and that local asset. And so it moves from a problem-based focus to an asset-based focus. And we really took that up in 2012. And I would love to see this chapter move from challenges to opportunities very quickly. And from an asset-based approach, and really try to think of how do we do, you know, I've done a lot of appreciative inquiry, and we've actually started using appreciative inquiry as a research technology that really thinks about the asset-based approach to our work. Rather than a research being done to solve a problem, how do we use research as a tool to do more good? A couple of things that I just bring up. We really struggled when we were doing the community of solution work with the term citizen. That's what was used back in the 60s. And back then it meant a human being who lived in an area, you know, they were a citizen of that. Because that term has been politicized, unfortunately, it's so tough to use that one now. And we've done some work on engaging the just right community member. And who is the just right? You know, we think about one of the opportunities, or one of what previously would have been called challenges, is who are the people you engage? And I think there's a section on this about sort of who are the folks you engage. And I think we've written quite a bit in our community advisory group. Our farmers, ranchers, school teachers have come up with what are the characteristics of the just right community member. And then the last thing I would say is that if you're thinking about problems, one of them is when you're doing community engagement, you lose economies of scale. And you can't do big for cheap. It's small for expensive. And there's a balance in there. But, you know, I have this photograph here of, this is the rural post office on my background, and this is in rural Colorado. And you can't do scale. You can't have a post office that has 1,000 mailboxes, because when you're out in the community, communities are small. And so you lose the economies of scale. And those are the things I'd say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for joining. That's great. Zeno and then Lorene, shall we do that cycle? Do you want to make a few comments?
Sure, I can just speak really quickly, not so much on the chapter draft, but just sort of, again, being, new to this group, but having been mentored into this work over a long period of time with Saeed. Everything that's being said here resonates in direct practice on a daily basis. So I think, just kind of, even for myself, just reflecting on how I come at Saeed knows me well, so I often come at things from a sort of deficit-based perspective. I think it's, being a psychologist, we look at everything in the negative. But the community partners that I'm working with, I mean, they're really focused on trying to find these solutions. And I really like the terminology around the communities of solutions that's actually helpful for me personally. So just to say that.
And Lorraine, is there any final comments that you want to ask the group or leave us with? And we hope this has been helpful.
It's incredibly helpful. I have so many ideas swimming around my head right now, but what's been great about this is being able to step back and think about my own journey doing participatory research and being able to frame it in this, like so many things that you've said. I'm like, I've said that to my community partners, I've said that to my academic partners, but I came at this from more of an academic lens, and it shouldn't. It should come from the lens of the community partnerships. So putting that hat back on and kind of just talking, and I'm hearing you all speak of very similar journeys. And so that's where I think I just need to step back and reframe a little bit. I love the idea of a much more positive outlook on it, and about how, community engaged research and the impact that it can have on non-research community things, approaches, issues that they may have, that we can find a way to really make a change and work together to make a change, is kind of a really exciting place. So yeah, so I think I just have to step back and kind of process everybody's awesome comments. I want to look at the communities of solution and see how we can frame this in that way, and still keep the evolution of the chapter and what it is meant to represent real and alive.
That's fantastic. Go ahead, Mickey.
I wanted to just thank everybody. This was a fascinating conversation and outline a challenge I've been dealing with in terms of trying to submit one of the exemplar cases. I'm working with a community partner that's been around for a lot longer than I have. And we tend to think of metrics and goals and so on. One of their goals is to be present in the community and to provide ongoing support and to be a sounding board. I just wanted to share, it's proving a challenge to represent. They work with people at the University of Minnesota, at Mayo. They work independently of academics. And it's providing certain insights into where we may not be examining all of our assumptions as carefully as we might.
I know that we're almost at the top of the hour. I also think that there are some things that we can, that's a really interesting topic please just submit whatever you have. Don't worry about that. I mean, submission wise, just submit it. Don't even give it a second thought. One thing that I've been working with is in terms of some of the metrics is, because I agree that they may have a different one, is one metric about how our research has changed based on community input. Would be a very simple metric that is bidirectional. So, if we've changed a lot, if we haven't changed at all, then probably the engagement was low. And if we've changed a lot based on it, the engagement was higher. I am capturing the chat. So we have all the articles, and if people have trouble getting them or needing them, I'm happy to download them and send them around. So please let me know. This has been a wonderfully rich discussion. Because the chapters are all integrated, we'll have a chance to discuss more about it. And I too have some things yet unsaid, but we hope you'll take careful notes and say them. And I can keep the line open for a little while longer if people want to stay on and talk, but I want to go ahead and dismiss or allow to depart people who have a 12 o'clock appointment. So this has been incredibly rich and wonderful. And thank you, Jack Westfall, for joining this group. We're so honored to have you, but we're really honored to have everybody here. So much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
I'll wait on the
Liz.
line, of course.
Have you seen the River of Life exercise that Nina has on the Engage for Equity website?
I need to run. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. I don't think I have. Let me make a note.
The-
Oh, wait, let me
one of
stop
the
the
reasons-
recording.
One of the reasons I mention it is